Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks for those who are joining us live, and thanks to those who are watching our archive. We're going to talk about the data story of caregiving. And joining me today is Lisa, because she has been doing her own project around what does data look like when we look at data differently within our personal caregiving experience. So Lisa, why don't you give us a quick 30-second introduction?
Hi, I am a medical mama. I have a daughter who is a young adult now with significant disabilities that require extensive amounts of care. She has high support needs. And so I have decades of caregiving experience that I went and tallied up. I'm also a numbers person. I had a BA in math before I started caregiving. And so I'm somewhat re-entering that world.
Okay. Isn't it nice when worlds that you don't think belong together all of a sudden absolutely belong together, right? It's the creative piece of what we do in terms of our work in the world. Okay. So here we go. We're going to get started. All right. So the data story of caregiving. I started looking at data a little differently 2 years ago after my mom died. And I started thinking about what if data tells a different story about caregiving? We often see research around family caregivers that looks at how many hours a week do they provide care, what kind of tasks and chores. And I've often found that that research misses the mark because sometimes our caregiving responsibilities isn't necessarily about chores and tasks. And I thought it would be helpful to have something that's more inclusive. And that's why I started thinking about what are other questions we could ask to collect different data that shows more about the caregiving experience. All right, so what we're talking about really is burnout and a different way of showing burnout through numbers. I don't think that people get the enormity of the responsibilities and pressure of caregiving until you see some numbers. One of the things that I started doing in 2015 was a simple family caregiving stress survey. So we have survey results from 1,300 family caregivers that indicate what's the stress number. And right now it's 4.09. And that is on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the most stressed. I only go from 1 to 5 because when you're really stressed, I don't think you want to pick a number from 0 to 10 because you're thinking, I have no idea what's the difference between 6 and 7. But you can tell the difference between 3, 4, and 5. So that's the stress number right now. It's never been lower than this. And what it says to me is caregiving stress is ever present. Maybe the intensity of it might be a little different, but it's with us. We live with ongoing stress. I also asked for insights about what the source of stress is. And the number one source of caregiving stress is missing our lives. And I think that's really helpful to understand. We talk about how we feel disconnected from our life. We feel lost to our caregiving experience. I often have described as feeling swallowed up by it. So it makes sense that this is our number one source of stress. And yet, I think oftentimes in the research around family caregiving, this doesn't necessarily come out because it's all about what do we do for our caree? And we don't ever think about, well, because I'm doing all this for my caree, what's missing in my life? We don't think of the family caregiver as multidimensional. We only research the family caregiver from the perspective of they're in service of their caree. And we really need to look at the family caregiver and be in service of him or her and understand what that experience is like. There's another little survey I do. I'll post a link to all these surveys because it's so helpful to me when you complete these. I started asking, well, what do you need that you don't have? What would you like us to focus on getting for you? And the number one answer is home care, affordable home care. That's what family caregivers say they need. And what's missing in policy discussions among our large national organizations that support family caregivers is that focus. They are focused on other things. And I'm just going to say something that's a little, you know what, I must have slept well or not enough last night, because I'm just going to say it. So oftentimes these large organizations have a staff they have to pay. So their client is the funder. And so the funder will give money to initiatives that are important to the funder, but not necessarily important to the family caregiver. And that has to change. That has to change. Okay. So then I do another survey around how exhausted are you during your caregiving experience? This one I think is telling. 72% of survey respondents selected 1 or 2 on a scale from 1 to 5. Now this one goes the other way. 1 is fatigued, 5 is energized. No one selected energized. No one. 72% selected 1 or 2. Yeah, I mean, that blows my mind how much we are missing in terms of supporting family caregivers. So then again, I go a little deeper. So what is exhausting for you? And it's coping. It's also scarcity. I don't have enough. It's also grief, and it's also loneliness. And we know that you can feel loneliness even if you are connected to a group of colleagues, friends, and family members. The feeling of loneliness comes from a lack of understanding or deep connection to others who get it. I just remember this several years ago, someone was posting on LinkedIn about a solution to family caregiver loneliness. And she said, here's a great idea. You should FaceTime with your friends and family members. And I thought, oh my gosh, but that's not what it is. We know how to FaceTime. It's just that we don't have anybody to FaceTime with who gets it, who understands, who can allow us to vent, who can be present as a listener. That's what's missing in our life. It's not the technology to connect. It's the other side of that connection, which is what's missing. Someone who gets it, who can listen. And then I think it's also important to talk about system navigation. A lot of the focus is on care coordination, but what's missing is system navigation. We navigate, manage, and advocate within 17 different systems. And oftentimes, in one situation, we are managing multiple systems. I like to think of this as an example of what it's like. When your caree is hospitalized and you are working toward discharge day, you don't get a phone call the day before from a discharge planner who says, Denise, I know you have a very busy day tomorrow. I know you're working. I know you've got projects. I know you've got deadlines. We're working on the right time to discharge your dad. What's a good time for you? Sister, it's just like, right. I mean, it's, thank you, sister, for that shared giggle. Yes, they never do that, right? They never do that. They never think of us as having any other responsibility other than to be in service of the system, the healthcare system. So we show up day of discharge knowing there's a long wait. We're going to have to do running. We're going to have to run after people to see where's the order. When do you think the order will come for discharge? What are the additional instructions for me? Where are the meds? How do I get the meds? Should I get the meds before we leave? And then the one thing that always would drive me nuts is the wheelchair. They won't discharge someone without that person being in a wheelchair. And we'd have everything ready. This happened once. We had everything ready, except there was no wheelchair available. So we had to wait for the volunteer to come. And I thought, I am never doing that again. On discharge day, I roam around the halls. I look for a wheelchair, and then I just hide it in the bathroom in the hospital room. I am not going to wait for another wheelchair. Anyway, so on discharge day, when they don't ask us when's a good time, we are also managing our work responsibilities We're giving updates to family members who are questioning every update that we give. Did you find out? Did you double check? Are you sure? And then we're managing our colleagues at work. We're managing the nerves of our caree because I think it's very nerve-wracking after a hospitalization to go back home and feel like I'm going to be okay at home. So we're managing our caree's nervousness, and we're also organizing the different providers. It could be delivery of medical equipment, home care through a home health agency. It could be a follow-up visit to the doctor, plus all the meds, all of it. And sometimes there's new technology that we're going to start using. So we're going to learn technology. Oh, and then there's the payer. What's Medicare gonna pay? What don't they pay? Oh, and then we have to go home and provide care. Oh, it's a lot. And that's just one situation. But every day we are managing multiple systems. So what if we really thought about the questions that we ask family caregivers about their experiences? How often do we ask them questions that are in service of a system? Here's an example. Many of our community-based organizations have programs that support family caregivers. Oftentimes, they use an assessment tool that a family caregiver has to complete before they can actually get programs and services. This assessment tool takes about 40 minutes. I have done it and I thought I was going to jump out of my skin. It was such a frustrating experience. It's a list of yes, no questions. And I think when you are asking yes, no questions, you often are missing what's really going on. I connected with the executive director of one of these community-based organizations last week, and she was just sharing, this is the assessment tool that we use, talking about it. I said, how do family caregivers feel about taking that assessment tool? Silence. She had never thought of that question, and she had never thought about the user experience, what it's like for the family caregiver. And she said, well, they know they have to get services. They know they have to complete the assessment to get services, so they go through it. I thought that is a terrible experience. So just think about that photo that I just shared, blah, 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 blah. That's who's calling for help, right? Someone on fire. They are so burnt out. They are on fire. And they have to sit with someone and go through a 40-minute assessment that often misses the mark in order to get help. Now, how awful is that? How awful is that? What if we thought about different questions to ask to better understand that family caregiver's day? Okay, so Lisa is going to share the questions she asked herself to capture different data.
So my caregiving story starts in it in the intense aspect when my daughter had a status seizure that lasted about 30 minutes. Over the next year, 3 medications failed to control her regular seizures that were happening every 5 days. So I spent 9 years managing the ketogenic diet for her, which meant that I measured about 10,000 meals to the nearest gram, because that's what the ketogenic diet for epilepsy is. It's a very precise diet that you have to calculate and measure out each meal. I scheduled and attended at least twice monthly medical appointments, which added up to over 500. I assisted my daughter to take over 3,400 baths. I went 18 years without wages, providing care often 12 hours a day with an additional 2 or 3 times waking at night. And my first adult steady paycheck for all of that, since I had a minimum wage job part-time in high school, was when I was 42 years old. I'm now working 26 hours weekly as a paid DSP. And in the state of Oregon, there are about 1,547 children who are eligible to participate in a waiver that would pay their parents. And these are just children under 18. And there are 150 spots for children to actually participate in that program, which is about 10%. So these are numbers about tasks and things I've done. And I realized when I started adding them up just how big some of those numbers are. For me, it really does make an impact to understand the magnitude of what I've done. Because when you do a task day after day after day after day, it may not feel like much. But when you add up all those days and all the time it took to do that and all of the opportunity cost or actual costs that you incurred, you get a much different perspective, and you can share that perspective with others. And I think the more of us that did that, the better we would be. I think if we can start collecting some of these types of numbers in aggregate, it actually does make a big difference. I love Denise asking more about, well, how do caregivers actually feel? Which is another piece of it. And I could spend 3 hours sharing how I actually feel about all of this. I very much relate to a lot of the things Denise was saying. And that's the real importance behind any of this. But numbers actually can help people understand why those emotions are so huge. Why are you getting frustrated and upset when this is the 20th phone call you've made to try to establish service or try to get delivery of a piece of equipment or whatever the case may be at the time? So thank you. Yeah,
Lisa, you used a couple terms. I just want you to define the terms for us. So
sure.
DSP.
Oh, a direct support professional, or some people actually say provider, direct support provider. It's a caregiver for a person with a disability, and it's not a medical position. It's the person day to day helping with tasks of daily living and instrumental tasks of daily living.
And oftentimes through a Medicaid waiver program, a family member can receive reimbursement through this program. Now, some programs, depending on the state, will say a spouse is not eligible. I think they're really working to change that. And some states kind of give you a hard time if you're a parent. So every state approaches reimbursement of family members for someone who's on Medicaid a little differently.
There are very, very few states that will pay the parent of a child under 18, even though there's not usually other caregivers available to be hired. In my state in Oregon, there was that law recently enacted just last year, which opened up those 150 spots out of 1,500 plus kids that would qualify by their medical condition, are qualified to hire anyone else except their parent. And some of those kids, not only is there workforce shortage and it's very difficult to find employees, but some of those kids have autoimmune disease or a severe mental health condition where it's really not safe to put them with a rotating crew of different people coming in and out that are not their parents. So, yeah, it's a big deal. And there is a nationwide movement, state by state, that is working in particular on that issue around parents of children under 18 receiving pay for these positions that do exist, that theoretically should have been funded. But the legislatures, when we approach them to allow parents to be paid, they say, well, we can't afford that. because they haven't actually allocated money to expect these services to be used. It's this giant peanuts football game.
Yeah. Incredibly frustrating. Lisa, I'm wondering what it was like to go through the process of being approved to be your daughter's direct service provider.
So, as far as me as an individual getting hired, the process was only waiting 18 years until she was
There you go.
eligible to hire
Yes.
me,
Yeah.
and doing all of the same work and more, because I'm also the manager of any other caregiver that's hired. And um, once my daughter turned 18, it was pretty simple to find an agency. Uh, there are plenty that are happy to onboard a parent as an employee once that's allowed. And the rest of the process was what I would have gone through already and did go through in order to hire non-family or non-parental caregivers. So she has a yearly individual service plan meeting. She, yeah, we had to find the agency and get her registered as a client, and uh, and we have to have monthly check-ins with her case manager.
And so typically within a state will certify certain home care agencies to actually be like a fiduciary for these individuals who are family members who are being hired to provide care. So you don't work directly for the state funnels money into agencies they've certified, then that agency hires the family member and then pays them. So you can see, though, that there's money getting lost in the system because that fiduciary is going to take a piece of that pie. So it's not direct from state to a family member. It goes around a little bit. So there's someone that's making a little bit of money on this as well.
Or a lot of money. Actually, one of the largest agencies in Oregon was recently brought to court, or is accused of fraud,
And you could,
because of the
yes.
money that they are taking. So we have all these rules and regulations to prevent fraud, but then we go and throw basically free license to the agency that's providing oversight. um, it's
Yeah. So we have one of our live attendees is sharing her story in the chat room. And I apologize, his or her story in the chat room. Thanks for being with us. And it is really the insight is our healthcare system is broken in many aspects, and that's exactly right. And I don't think we get how broken it is until we look at the numbers. And the numbers all come from the family caregiver's experience as a whole person, not just in service of a caree, but in all aspects of their life. That's how we better understand what's broken. When we look at those 17 systems, the one system that I don't have on the slide is the 18th system. And you know who that is? It's the family caregiver. The only system who interacts with all of them is the family caregiver. That's the only one who interacts with all those systems. And yet, look at what we have to do to interact with those systems. We have to twist ourselves into a pretzel knot, trying to make phone calls during their office hours, trying to reach the right person. But then there's turnover. So then you're trying to reach the next right person. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. Yeah. There's so much to unravel in this conversation. I feel like this is one of many, but it's been so helpful. So I think, Lisa, do you want to add anything before I go back to some of the questions that we started asking in a survey?
I think going back to your questions is great.
Okay. All right, let's go back and then we'll just keep going on insights that are helpful to talk out. So if we think about all that we just talked about, it's collecting data and stats. So how do we bring them to life? So I put together a survey. I did this a couple years ago. And interestingly enough, so I was trying so hard to get people to connect to the survey, and I was not getting very far with it. So it was one of those things I thought, okay, I'm going to keep it out there and I'm going to keep moving on. And Lisa and I connected in October. Lisa joined us in our caregiving listener project as a storyteller. And the story she told her listener was the story of her data. And I thought, oh my gosh, someone else is a like-minded individual. We have to align on this. So then we had a conversation. I joined Lisa on her podcast. I'll share a link to the podcast in the show notes for our archive. And then we thought, let's get together to talk this out in a more expanded way. So that's why we're connecting with you today. So in the survey that I had created a couple years ago, trying to really capture this data, it was about the total number of carees that someone has had over their life to date. Oftentimes it's, who are you caring for now? It's important for us to talk about who are we caring for within our lifetime. So for instance, one of our live attendees talked about caring for parents and now caring for a sibling. Well, when we think about caring for a sibling, we want to also understand that there were parents who were receiving care who have died. That impacts today's caregiving experience. We can't look at these caregiving experiences in isolation. They are a culmination of experiences. And I think that's important for us to get. And then if we understand how many carees we've had, then we can look at the number of years, again, throughout our life up to today that have been spent in caregiving roles. And then we can get into how many late night emergencies have you managed? That's important to know. How many emergency room visits and hospitalizations have you managed over the past 2 years, for instance? And then how many meltdowns have you had to manage in the past 3 days? And it's not just a Carrie's meltdown, it's our meltdowns, right? We have our own meltdowns. Maybe they happen in private, maybe they happen behind closed doors. Maybe when we're alone in the car, we have a meltdown, but I think we need to count how many meltdowns we have to show how much this drains us. How we are always trying to find the patience to keep going. And then it also speaks to that one of those systems, which is the nervous system. We are always managing our caree's nervous system. They have meltdowns. We come in to be that calming factor. And yet, who comes in to calm us? And if you have a meltdown, oftentimes people will say, oh, it'll be better tomorrow. And one of the reasons you're having a meltdown is because you know it's not going to be better tomorrow. So you're feeling it today, knowing what's going to come tomorrow and thinking, I can't. So we have a meltdown. We have a meltdown. So we do have some stats, and I pulled out a couple just to show you. And one of the other questions we ask is, how long have you been on hold? Oh, yeah. 4 people. And again, our survey results are small now. So this is a small snapshot. But I think it's interesting that 30% of our small snapshot have been on the phone for more than an hour, almost an hour and a half to get help. I mean, how do you find that time if you're working? And we know those calls happen during a work day. Well, that's our work day too.
Or if your caregiving your care recipient has very high support needs, how do you manage that?
How do you keep a carry occupied on an ongoing basis when you think, okay, I just need to make a 10-minute phone call? An hour and 10 minutes later is when that call ends. So how many pharmacists and EMTs do you know by first name? I thought this was an interesting question to ask because it gets into how often are we at the pharmacy? How often are we calling 911? One of our attendees, or one of our survey respondents, knows the name of 5. Yeah. Yeah. After you take this survey and share your stats, and I'll send a link to that as well, you have an opportunity to create these graphs that you can share on social media. Because again, we want the data to tell a story. So I developed these templates for you that you just fill in with whatever your numbers are so you can tell a story. We talked earlier about the 17 caregiving systems. Another concept I developed is the 6 caregiving stages. You can also figure out where you are along the 6 caregiving stages. Before you take the survey, you're prompted to get some data, as well as, if you want, to look at some information about the 6 caregiving stages to figure out where you might be. Number of battles won this month. I also tried to think of questions that could spark a conversation on social media. If you saw this graphic as you were scrolling through LinkedIn, wouldn't you want to know what was the battle you won? It sparks a conversation. You'd also want to know, oh my gosh, what were the meltdowns about? And then you can share, well, my meltdown was, my Carrie's meltdown was, my sister's meltdown was. It's just a little bit of a different way to talk about our caregiving experience to really demonstrate the intensity of it. Here's another template, just a few different data points that I entered in. So here's my stress number. One of the other questions I ask is, when do you worry the most? I worry the most at night. And then number of medical appointments, meltdowns, and number of individuals who help me. And you might be tempted to put 0. And when you're tempted to do it, just put it in there. And you might later think, oh, darn it, it's not 0. I do have someone who helps me, but that's okay. In that moment, it can feel like no one is. You can always adjust these data points, but it could be that you post a graphic like this on a Wednesday morning to reflect, this is my Wednesday morning and no one is helping me. And it could absolutely be the truth, right? Maybe you had help scheduled, but help canceled. And then you're making the phone calls to find someone, anyone, and they all say no. So on that Wednesday morning, the number of individuals who are helping you definitely is 0. And it's not because you haven't asked. I think that's the other thing that gets me so crazy is oftentimes people will say, well, you haven't asked. Oh, I'm tired of asking. I need to take a little break from asking. It's not like
Do
we
you
have,
need to get to that 100 times before it counts
yes,
as having asked? Like,
right, yes. How many times do I have to ask and get nowhere? Does it count that I've asked for help? Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think people appreciate how easy it is to get burnt out from asking for help. And I also think people don't get how hard it is to bring in help. So Lisa, you shared some really significant concerns about bringing in outside help. And it could be because outside help could jeopardize a caree's health. And it also
yeah,
could be that a caree just has such specific care needs that it might be very difficult to really feel like I can train someone on how to manage this.
yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why I want people to start thinking a lot more broadly about supporting family caregivers, because a lot of times I keep coming back to the scene in Lord of the Rings, and they're almost to the top of Mordor, and they're gonna throw the ring in, and Sam says, "I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you." You know, the support around, so at least that intense caregiver can have other things taken off their plate, perhaps it's a cleaning service that's easy to find and hire, perhaps it's convenience meals that are being delivered, perhaps it's yard care being done, or someone can do some of that administrative work if they can't be a direct caregiver. Maybe they can make some phone calls or do some research. And I think that looking at support of family caregivers very broadly in that way is so super important.
And again, it's
I
because,
think,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, there's a lot of ways we could be helped. It doesn't have to be that respite care that sometimes is not, just really isn't feasible, for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it is, and let's make it more accessible too, but often it's not.
And it goes to the point that people only focus on family caregivers as being of service and in service to a caree. So that's why they think about help that way. I always say help is for the family caregiver and it's for the caree, and that help is different. It looks different. Also, the other part that would frustrate me is people would think what helps my dad helps me. Now, I don't mean to say that what helps my dad doesn't help me, but I am not my dad. I am an individual separate from my caree, and oftentimes we were lumped together as as really only needing a certain type of help. But we are two individuals. We are two individuals. Okay. So there's another template which kind of gives you a little bit more of a bigger picture of family caregiving. So the total number of carees. When I did this a couple years ago, I counted all my carees and I reflected back on this stat just a couple weeks ago and I thought, why did I lie about the number of carees I had? I really said that to myself. Like I caught myself in a lie. And then I thought, oh, I helped my grandmother. I helped my aunt. I helped my niece. I helped my parents. I really had just thought about my most recent, which was my parents. And I forgot about the ones that were in the past. And we can't do that. We cannot do that. We have to look at the full picture. And just as a reminder, when you worry about a family member, you're a family caregiver. And then if we think about the total number of carees, then we have a better idea of how many years we've spent in a caregiving role. We often again talk about present. It's important to have the total number. Okay. And then there's more of an infographic that you can use. And again, this is a template, and you can personalize the template with whatever data is important to you, and then the description of that data. If you are a long distance family caregiver, perhaps indicating how many miles you traveled to provide care within 3 months would be helpful.
Or how many miles you've traveled with your care recipient in order to access their medical care. For a lot of us, that's a real issue. I live in a
Absolutely.
relatively rural area where often people have to drive up to the other end of the state.
Excellent. Right. And you can also add a data point about how many medical systems you interact with. People think you just go to one system, one hospital. That's not true. Depending on how many specialists are involved, you might go to one specialist within one system, but then another specialist within another system. And guess what? Those systems don't talk. You're the connector between the systems. I also think the data around number of medications can be helpful. And you could even break it out more. I think Lisa has been so brilliant at breaking out numbers. So you could break out the number of medications into the number of dosages dispensed over the past 30 days. So if you have a med that is given 3 times a day, times 30 days, that's 90 dosages. If you have 10 meds, yeah, is it
Yeah.
possible? Yeah, I mean, could you be dispensing meds 900 times a month? I mean,
Yeah. And those are the kinds of things that, are repetitive every day. And so it's so easy to lose track of the scale uh, that you're really doing work at.
yes, right. Oh, I just did it today.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you did it
Yeah.
today plus all the days before and all the days going forward. You might have data around, for instance, wound care. So I did a lot of wound care with my dad, and I wish I had paid attention to how many wounds I bandaged. So you could even think about that. You could even think about how many bottles of, for instance, of a certain over-the-counter ointment that you use. So I think about antibiotic ointment. Oh my gosh, I went through that like constantly with my dad, constantly, constantly. He had, anyway. So thinking about how many bottles of something you go through every month to indicate this is what reflects what I'm doing every month. 2 boosts a day. There you go. Yep. How many boosts or insured do you go through? How many cans, right?
So 60 a month.
Yeah, there you go. 60 a month. Yeah, you could also think about how many nights do you get up to administer a treatment or a medication or to take care of a medical need. Over the past 30 days, this is the number of nights I got up to provide some level of care. The other question that I ask in the survey is, what are the 5 words that describe you? And so this is an example of what it could look like. So I'm an advocate for 4. I mentor new family caregivers. I'm an organizer of 10 diagnoses, right? I'm an investor in 12 individuals. So the 12 individuals could be, for instance, kids, grandkids, other family members, friends. And then the 5th word could be Phoenix because you keep going. So we ask you to think about the 5 words that could describe you. And we have a little bit of a template that you can review to get some ideas of what are the words. And then going back to this idea that it's important for us to acknowledge what we've experienced prior to this caregiving experience that's current. This is what it could look like. So for instance, when I was caring for my dad, this is what my graphic could look like. I care for my dad. I like to connect to opportunities. I keep going. I invest in family caregivers, and I'm a mourner for. Because that speaks to what you are bringing into this current experience. So when I talk about caring for my dad, oh, she cares for her dad. Oh, she cares for her dad. Oh, her mom just died, and oh my gosh, her brother died. Gives an insight into what my dad is feeling, what I'm feeling. I just wanted to put this up as a tool. So we're talking about, so we're talking about all these things we do. Oh my gosh. Like, how do we get up in the morning? And so there's a tool that I developed that helps you with healing recovery for your body. And it's naming what you're recovering from, a long day, what you recover with, a quick warm bath, because I want to recover to relaxing so I can sleep better at night. And when you keep track of your strategies, which is that second box, I'm recovering with, those are your strategies. When you keep track of that, then you have strategies you can go to when you're thinking, I need to recover from this. But what do I do? Oh, I'm going to look at my list. And now I know for this, it might help me to take the dog for a walk, sit down in the yard, call someone. It's important for us to think through, how do we actually take moments on a regular basis to recover? If we keep powering through, our body is going to just be so mad at us. We want our body to be okay. We have to stop and take care of it. And
Well,
that's,
or a lot of us use potentially less healthy coping mechanisms like overeating or excessive video games or
yeah, absolutely.
various or things that are even less
Yes,
healthy than that for some
yes,
people.
yes. Yeah, yep,
Yeah, yeah. So that's a wonderful idea, Denise. Thank you.
yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Hey, you know what? I also think our body is craving things from us or for us during our caregiving experience that we don't crave in less stressful situations. I craved sugar. I couldn't get enough. I was so stressed out. We're just doing the best we can. And what we're looking to do is just make a little bit of a tweak to something that's maybe a little less sugar. I'm going to recover with some sugar. I'm not going to recover with a lot of sugar. Even that makes a difference. Okay. Yeah, I love the suggestions that one of our attendees is sharing. Yeah. Really that connection to faith, attending mass, that is helpful. Oh, oh, drinking water, right? We overlook these things that are so helpful, but it's important that we stay nourished. Friends and quiet time, quiet time. That survey that I had shared earlier about what exhausts us, what energizes us is solitude. So I'm just curious, what would be a question you wish people would ask you about your caregiving experience?
Can I answer, Denise?
Yes.
Yeah. What you just did there was powerful, and I think if more often through my experience people had asked what recharges or energizes you, and helped me to build a written list and have those things in front of me as options, that would have been very helpful. I think what recharges you? So that's a great question.
Yes. Yeah. What recharges you and how can I help you and support you so that you are able to recharge? In our archive, we'd love for you to share questions that you wish people would ask. So you can post them in the comment section. That would be great. And then I will share this link in our chat room. And for those of you who are here live and want CEUs, just wait another minute and I'll share our evaluation for CEUs. We do like you to complete the evaluation regardless of whether or not you receive CEUs. It's very helpful for us. Oh, how are you doing now? That's one of the questions that one of our attendees is sharing in our chat room. A question she wished someone had asked or would ask. How are you doing now? How can I help you now in the aftermath of these recent events? Yeah. Yep. I love that there's a question and a follow-up question. Lisa, what final thoughts would you like to share as we close for today?
Thank you all for being here. And I really do hope that some people collect some of their own numbers or really interesting data around their experience. And I do think it's a really valuable experience to collect those numbers and understand the magnitude of what you've accomplished.
And I just don't know of anyone who is collecting data from individuals in order to share the entirety of, of what that data looks like.
The closest I can think of is estimates of the financial value
Yeah, there
of
you
family
go.
caregivers that are out
Yes.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some few things like that. But it would be extremely interesting to break it down into nationwide how
Right.
many out, I think hours might be out there, how many of this task or that task are completed by family caregivers, how many appointments are scheduled, how many miles are driven to seek medical care, how many
And also I think it would be,
different events like that. Yeah.
yeah. And I think it would be interesting to know how many bad days do you feel you've had in the past 30 days?
Yeah.
How many good days? Let's take a look at what that ratio is. And then thinking through what's the intervention. And then now we start to measure good days versus bad days with trying to increase the ratio of good days to bad days.
Can you imagine if we had um, across all family caregivers in the United States, or some huge number, uh, each caregiver rating their quality of life for that month?
Yes, right,
Just
right.
overall for the last X amount of time, um, how has your experience been? To hey, I'm free and living my best life, to I'm really, really struggling here.
Because we talk a lot about a carrie's quality of life, and we rarely really think through what does quality of life look like for the family caregiver. I'm working on a pilot program with a startup. We're going to match technology with caregiving coaching for dementia caregivers. And one of the questions that we're going to look at is measuring that family caregiver's quality of life. When there's an effective intervention for them, what happens to their quality of life? And then what's their observation of their caree's quality of life? Yeah, we really miss the mark on quality of life for a family caregiver. Again, because we only look at it from one dimension. We forget that it's a whole being. Okay, Lisa, before we close, actually, can you put in the chat room what your website address is? How can people find you?
I would love to share my podcast.
Sure.
Um,
Fabulous. Okay, and I'll include that in the show notes for those of you
that's
who are watching the archive. Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. This was really fun.
Thank you all. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks to those who joined us live, and thanks to those who are watching the archive. Please take our survey so you can share your data, and we'll continue to keep you updated on this project. We're starting here, but this isn't the end. This is where we're beginning. And stay connected to us. You can join our community, which is caringourway.com. And you can join us in future events. We have lots of things that we have happening every month that are fun and easy to join. And then we have deeper conversations so you connect to others who get it. Okay, thanks everybody.